Hi, I'm Noel with CreationEffects.com. If you've seen the other Creation Lens Flares videos, then you know that you can make some really cool lens flare effects using the Creation Lens Flares template. And I made this tutorial to discuss a few of the issues that may come up when you're using the template. It's always possible that a layer gets displaced or an expression gets turned off accidentally. So it's important to know how to recognize those problems so you can set things right again. And before I get into anything, I want to strongly recommend that you make a backup copy of the project before you use it. Since this isn't a plugin, it's not going to reset itself every time you open After Effects. And once you've changed things and save it, it's forever changed. So store a backup copy of the project somewhere, and then always work on a copy of the original project. Okay, first let me talk about speed. Since these lens flares are made with normal layers with effects in them, they have to render just like with any other project you've worked on. So if you've got a ton of elements in your flare and you're noticing that your preview is taking too long to update, the most important thing you can do is set your resolution to half or less. And this won't change your final video, just your preview here, and it will make a significant difference in speed. And of course, you can always hide a bunch of elements while you're working to make things run faster, and then you just keep them hidden until you're ready to render. Another important setting is live update. If your lens flare isn't updating in real time when you move your control layer, turn on live update, which is this icon here in the timeline. These lens flare elements are full of expressions, which are these bits of code within various parameters. And the expressions often reference the slider controls or other layers. And probably the error message you're most likely to get in this template is the one that occurs when one of these links is broken. And you can see if I delete my control layer, I'll get this message that says, bad argument, couldn't find, blah, blah, blah. And then I'll have to click OK 100 times because of all these expressions in these layers that pointed to that control layer, and now they're wondering, well, where did it go? It can happen when layers or slider controls get misplaced or deleted and it breaks the link, and even if you undo the action that screwed everything up in the first place, you'll still have all kinds of problems. And that's because when you get that error, the expressions get turned off automatically. So you'll have to turn those back on. So first I'll undo my action and bring my control layer back. That's Command or Control Z. And then I need to locate the expressions. So I'll select all my layers and then right click and choose Reveal Expression Errors. And you can tell these expressions had errors because they have a yellow exclamation point next to them. I can turn these back on just by clicking the equal sign. Here's a few tips to make sure you don't get that error message in the first place. And if you've watched the other tutorials, this is all review. First, when you're copying a layer with an alpha matte, like this light rays element, select the top layer first, which is the alpha matte layer, and then shift-click the bottom layer, and then copy and paste them into your comp. Selecting the top layer first will preserve their order and you won't get that error message. Also, when copying expressions from the expression library, always copy over the slider controls first, and then go back and copy your expression and paste that over. Another important thing to watch out for, never have any slider controls selected when you're pasting new slider controls into a layer, because the new slider controls will replace the old ones, which will cause errors. Okay, one more note on these pesky troublemaking alpha matte layers. Normally, if you have an element that you want more copies of, you can just duplicate it as many times as you want. But if it's one of the 4 elements that uses alpha matte layers, it's not quite that simple. Each of these alpha matte layers have expressions that point to the element below it. And if you duplicate these 2 layers, you can see that their layer titles change. It now says Light Rays 2 and Light Rays Alpha Matte 2. But the expressions in this new Alpha Matte layer haven't changed, so they're still linking to this original layer. We need Alpha Matte 2 to point to Light Rays 2. The best way around this is to rename the layers before you duplicate or make copies of them. So if you're just copying them from the Elements comp, rename them in the Elements comp, and then copy and paste them to the comp that you're working in. Or if you want to duplicate the elements that are already in your comp, copy them over to a different comp first. Like I'll just temporarily put them in my effects library here, and then I'll rename the layers, which updates the expressions, and then I'll copy, Command or Control C, and then paste them, Command or Control V, back into my original comp. If any slider control on an element appears to not be working, you can use that reveal expression errors trick that we discussed earlier to see if any expressions are turned off. And if they are, just turn them back on and the slider control should work fine. If you're using the slider control and all of a sudden you get this error, After Effects cannot allocate buffer for 3000 pixels or whatever, well, chances are a layer was scaled up more than After Effects could handle. If you need to make shapes much larger, get in the habit of using the expansion slider more. For solid layers, you can expand an element up to the size of the comp. You don't want to make it bigger than the comp or it'll get cut off. Hence this note next to the expansion slider that says keep within frame. Once you've expanded it, you can use the scale slider control to make the whole layer bigger if you really need huge shapes. So if you're moving your lens flare around and you notice that a shape is cut off like this, well, that's usually because you used the expansion slider too much and you expanded the shape beyond the boundaries of the layer. You can try to turn down the expansion a bit and then use the scale slider to make the element bigger, or another option may be to increase the size of the layer itself. So go to the Layer menu and Solid Settings, lock the aspect ratio, and then increase the layer size a bit. This can often be an easy fix, but certain elements become displaced when you do this, and they no longer move in the way that you expect them to, which makes the element pretty much useless. So you'll want to watch out for that and just play with the expansion slider and scale slider instead if that happens. Now when you're clicking around here in your canvas and dragging your control layer around, it can be easy to select the wrong layer and move it out of position. And maybe you don't notice until it's too late to use the undo button. So if you notice that something seems out of place, open up the position parameter of that layer and reset its position by typing in 960 and 540. These are the coordinates of the center of the comp. Now what if you're adjusting the global controls in the control layer and it seems to affect every element except one? Chances are it's not an error, but it's just that the local setting for that element is turned way down. By local, I'm referring to the slider controls on the actual element. The global controls on the control layer work by multiplying or dividing the local values of a property. So if a local value is 0, the global control won't affect it. For example, this reflection shape element has a high local softness value, so the global softness value will affect it a lot. If I turn the local softness down to 0, the global control does very little. It works this way so that as you turn a global control down all the way to -100, all the elements will reach a value of 0 at the same time. Lastly, a quick note about the reflection particles array element, which has all these reflection shapes made from the particle playground effect. More than once I ran into some weird issues with this element, and as far as I could tell, it was an After Effects bug. At times the reflections wouldn't be visible unless I turned off another layer, or sometimes the reflections would stop moving closer and further from the center of the comp when I moved the control layer. And when I first discovered this, I thought, oh no, I made this really important element and I never even noticed that it doesn't work. And I had already used it in a number of presets, but I was forced to come up with another way to get lots of reflections on one layer because I was convinced that this reflection particles array element didn't work. And that's how I came up with a reflection shape array. And I'm glad I did that because the reflection shape array is an even better element, I think. But the point is, as soon as I closed After Effects and started it up again, the particles worked fine. So I think it's a bug, and if something like that does happen to you, I recommend just restarting After Effects. So I hope these tips help you avoid some issues while working with the template. If you watch these tutorials in order, you should be able to master this template by now, so go and create some beautiful lens flares.